Hi. So in this video, we're going to show you how to add a view and constraints. So at the end of this video, you should have two new buttons on your first fragment screen, and maybe even change the colors to how you want to see them. So let's go ahead and start with that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to fragment first and go to the code segment. You're going to look at your text view and your constraints. So if you look at constraints, you can see layout underscore constraint end to end of, constraint bias, to start off and to top off. So what this is going to essentially show you is how your design is laid out. So what are constraints? So if we go over here, you'll notice if I click on one of these, I have a couple arrows. So these arrows are what are called constraints. They show me how things are in relation with each other. So like how this text file is in relation to this button, and how this text file is in relation to the outside perimeters, the top of the screen, or this one to the bottom of the screen. This is what helps you lay out your actual view. So just go ahead and look through this and make sure your code presents in the same way. Now that we've take a minute and pause the screen as you go to see if your screen lines up. Next, let's go back to here. Next thing we're going to do is show you how to adjust the constraints from the left, right, top, and bottom of each thing. So if you click on this, you can either look at the constraint right here visibly, or you can go to layout. Layout. This is the constraint. As you can see, my top button is currently set to 208, 0, 0, and then this is showing it creates a bottom constraint. So let's go ahead and create it. And now it's showing you the bottom constraint is set to the next button of 100. Let's change that to 100. I just don't like the 101. So this is how your app looks, and this has four constraints as well. So to create a constraint, what you have to do is first let me delete that. We'll see. Sorry. To delete the constraint, what you first have to do is click on the text file. While holding Control, hit on the one of these blue four dots. This, as you can see, it has an X over it indicating I want to delete that constraint. And if you hit the mouse pad while holding Control, it will delete that constraint and mess up your view a little. But if you want to recreate a constraint, just go ahead and click on the thing you want to create a constraint from, hit on the white circle, and hit the side wall while holding the pad. And that will create your constraint. You can then go ahead and adjust the constraint in here. So if I want it offset, I can do any of that. The top constraint, 208, bottom is 100 to the next one. And go ahead and do that. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to change the constraint layout so this hello world is pointing to the top, the two sides, and the top section of the next button. And then if you check the next button, you're going to create four constraints where each one is pointing. The top one's pointing to the bottom of the hello text button, and these are pointed to the walls, and then this one's pointed to the bottom of your screen. So go ahead and take a minute to do that. And if you look as you create your text constraints, these values should update themselves on their own. But for now, let's go back to the image. The next thing we're going to do is add a button and add new constraints to it. So if you go back, what we're going to go is open up Palette. And for some reason, Palette does not appear to be there. I am just stupid. It is right here. So as you open up Palette, you can see there's a bunch of stuff that you can open. What we're going to do is we're going to select button, and then what we're going to do is we're going to drag and drop it onto the design view and placing it under the text view near the other button. So we're going to drag it and place it right here. As you can see, it's not really aligned with anything, and we can move it as we please. So what are we going to do? We're going to align it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, and as you can see, it's been also added to the component tree, and it has constraints. So if you look at the constraints, it's saying it's not horizontally or vertically constrained, and that's what we're going to fix next. So how are we going to add constraints? We're going to add 4 constraints here. First constraint is going to be from here to the bottom of hello world, from here, from the left side to the left wall, and then from the right side to the next button, and from the bottom to the bottom of the page. And now we're going to delete the left side of this next button and connect it to the right side of the button. So this one should have 4 constraints, and so should this one. Hang on, let me go ahead and create that one. For some reason, it's not creating. Now let's go from this. Let's create it to that. Just do it that way. But you're going to want to create 4 constraints from the left, the top, from the next button to the right, and next button to the bottom. And you also want to do the same thing from button, left to the left screen, from the right to the next button, top to the bottom of the text button, and the bottom to the bottom of the screen. So let's go ahead and do that. So the next thing we're going to do is, as you can see, some things is going to show as error. Let's read what that error is. So, only thing we have now after we've added those constraints is that this button text is hard coded. So let's go back to the text file. So as you can see, it's hard coded. So what we're going to do is we're going to go here, go to declaration, and we're going to change it. What are we going to change it to? We can decide that later. But for the time being, we're going to change that, declare that to. So once again, right click, go to declarations or usages. Hang on. For some reason, okay, let's just open the strings value ourselves and create a new string value here. String name, let's name it button. And let's have the text say button. So now if we go to fragment first, we're going to, instead of having it actual hard coded, we're going to do at string button. And now that should get rid of that previous error. So now if we go back here, it's perfect. So we can delete right constraints or left constraints. So if we don't have either one of those constraints, control, and we delete that one, it's going to look something like this. So it's going to look something like this at the end of your process. So, and this is how you want it to view. And here, instead of having this, we're going to delete that and put it to the bottom of the screen, which is right over here. Perfect. So, once again, let's check the bottom, have this one to the left. Let's delete all these constraints and rework it. So this is going to be to the bottom. This left is going to be right to there, and this to the bottom of that. So now if we go back to the next button, string widget is going to be, say, 200. Perfect. And let's also set this one to be 200. And let's say the bottom constraints to be 50. this is what your screen should look like at the end. So once again, if I go back to the code, you can look at it, take your time, and make sure everything matches up. You have two buttons now, button first and button. But we don't want them to have the same exact name or like the same similar ID. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to change the ID. So we want to change the button name. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and change the button name. So so as we go here, we're going to go back to the design view, click on the button, and check its declared attributes. As you can see, it has an ID. We're going to change the ID. We're going to call it toast button. And when you hit enter, it's going to say rename ID resource button and its usages. And you're going to hit refactor. What refactor does is change all use of the ID button to toast button so your code it still functions properly. Next thing we're going to do is double check your code and make sure everything works. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the name of the buttons and add a third button as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to go for open this button and change its ID as well from, that should not be, so button first, we're going to change the ID to call it random underscore button. Random button. So once again, refactor to change all uses. And now we're going to change the code from next to random. So we're going to go here, create a new, we're going to go to the string file and create a new string name. Or you can just change from the button name for next to something else. So what I'm going to do is change next to say random. So now if you go back and look, the image now says random. But in my code, if you look at the random button, the string still says next, and that's quite confusing when you're reading through code. So we also want to change the string name. So I'm going to change it to random button underscore text. So now that won't get confused. But here it still says next, and we want to change that. What we're going to do is add string. So we're going to do random add string slash random underscore button underscore text. And now this is going to make our code readable. And if we go back to our image, it will show it as random. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to change this button to say toast. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the strings file and create a new button that says toast. Instead of doing all that, I can just change the name of this button to toast underscore text and change this to toast. Now, if I go back into the code of first fragment, I can see we should have an error, and that's because it's still pointing to button, which no longer exists. So what I'm going to do is type toast underscore text, and there we go. That should have fixed our code. But now we're going to go ahead and add a third button. So the third button, once again, we go to palette, common, and then just drag and drop a basic button. So once again, let's create our constraints. The top constraint to the bottom of hello world, bottom constraint to the bottom of the page, left constraint to here, and the right constraint to the random button. Now we can also create a left constraint from there to the button and toast to button. But we want them all set at the same height. So what we're going to do, once again, go here and edit the bottom constraint to 50. and the top constraint to 200. And now all of them are perfectly in line with each other, and the spacing is pretty good. So, next thing we're going to do is double check our code once again. So, your code should look like this: random button, text view first, toast button. Oh, wait, but our ID still says button 2. We don't want our IDs to be generic as button because we actually want to describe it with something. So once again, we're going over here, hitting button, and changing the ID to, to count button. Once again, we hit refactor so the code updates as well. And if you look at the code, it will change to count button. So once again, let's look through the code, make sure it matches up as you see it on the screen. Now that that's all done, go ahead and run your app and make sure it's working properly. And then now go ahead and change the font, the background colors, the button colors, and the text colors and font to whatever you think looks nice. And that's the end for this step. And if you're having trouble troubleshooting, just go through the code and make sure it matches up.